1 second. This is a waiting game we always talk about.
Waiting for everything to connect.
Mm-hmm. And we are live.
All right. Looks like we are live and ready to go. Thank you, Lindsay. Well, you folks are in for a real treat this evening. You really are, especially if you are book fans. Before I introduce our guests for our special programs, Pages of History, let me thank some of our sponsors that make possible all of the public programs and presented annually by the James Programs. The Fredericksburg Savings Charitable Trust, the Paul and Jane Jones Trust, administered by Trustee Walter J. Sheffield, the Stuart Jones Charitable Trust, and the Friends of the James Monroe Museum. We greatly appreciate their support. I also remind you that our audience on Facebook Live, that you may post questions throughout this whole conversation. So as we go along, if something comes up and you have a question that you want to do, feel free to ask to the comment section that should be to the right of your screen. And our public programs coordinator, Lindsay Crawford, who is administrating the live broadcast, the person behind the curtain there, will collect these all and pass them on to me to give to our guests. And I promise that we will get to as many as we possibly can. So please make the questions as succinct and on topic as possible. So without further ado, let me introduce you to our very special guest this evening. Kristi Moore is an Iraq War veteran who began her company, War Archives and Preservation, after graduating from the University of Mary Washington with a degree in historic preservation and anthropology. She studied with the Library of Congress, the University of Cambridge, and the Fredericksburg Circuit Courthouse Archives, and now provides book and paper conservation services to the local community, as well as various nonprofit, state, and federal organizations. So we are very, very happy to have you. And I will pass it to Kristi to discuss the Moore Archives.
Thank you, Jared.
Yes.
I appreciate that.
So, Kristi, can you give us some background on what your job is?
So I primarily provide book and paper conservation and restoration. The majority of what I work on is old family Bibles, but every now and again I get some old books, a lot of old journals. It's really interesting to see the variety that comes through the door. So I work on plain paper items like maps and atlases and things, handwritten letters, as well as books.
Wow. So that's a huge variety that you get in, I imagine.
Yeah.
Could you touch a little bit on the difference between conservation and restoration? And a lot of people want to go there.
Yeah. The difference between conservation and restoration is what you do to the item and how much you do to it. So when people think about conservation, they usually think about fixing all the broken things and bringing it back to its former glory. That is actually restoration. So you are restoring the item back to a point in its past. You can restore it to multiple different points in its past, depending on what's been done to it over time. But that's one thing that we can do. It's not something that we do for everything. So conservation is to take the item as it is and stabilize it so that it doesn't degrade any further as it is. So that involves a good bit of chemistry and some very careful work so that you're not changing the physical structure of what you have, but you're just stabilizing it so it doesn't break down anymore.
Oh, wow.
We generally save the conservation work for really valuable old items, especially if you want to sell it on the open market or if it's a historic item. And the restoration is stuff that we generally apply to something that isn't financially valuable, but it is valuable to the person who owns it. So it can have a different effect on the price of the item if you want to sell it on the open market, depending on how much work I do on it and how much I change the way it looks.
Fascinating. So basically, with restoration, you're bringing it back to an original, a previous condition. With conservation, you're sort of arresting it in time, and sort of freezing, slowing down the degradation as much. So that's really, really interesting. And I know that you have brought some items, or you have some items to show us today and to discuss a little bit about that. Do you want to show us some goodies there?
Sure thing.
Right.
So the museum was kind enough to let me comb through their archives and choose some good examples of books that I think you as viewers might encounter when you go through your family collections. So I'm going to try and angle this discussion more towards what you might see with your collections, different things you might encounter, and things to look out for. And we can talk a little bit, especially in questions afterwards, about specific problems that you see and how we can get those fixed. So I'm starting off with a volume here. This one is from, let me check my notes. This one is from 1753. So I chose this one because this is an older book and it has different binding concerns than what we generally encounter. So you can see, let me make it large here. There we are. So you can see that it's bound on these cords here. And these cords are starting to become visible from the outside. So this is part of the structure of the book. So this book hasn't had any restoration or conservation done on it. So this is its natural, how it appears now before any work is completed. And you can see that the cover is starting to come separated a little bit from the body of the book. It's still held on by those cords, but not for too long. So this particular book is, it's really lovely. It's got some very good quality paper. It's works of Sir Francis Bacon. So this was, I had to look it up because I can't read Roman numerals, 1753. So one cool thing about this book that you can see is it doesn't have a printing organization. This was actually printed on demand for the listed individuals, and this was done in London. So when books this old were printed, and especially as large as this one is, they were generally printed on demand. So these particular individuals who are probably binders requested the book be printed and they get copies of it. So you don't see a large publication company like you do in later volumes. But you can see from looking at this that the facing image and the ink has transferred to the facing page. And so this is some of the damage that you can see over time. Right now, it's just visible. There doesn't seem to be really significant damage yet, but it can over time decay and negatively affect the facing page, which is something that you can see. And the same thing is happening here. But overall, I mean, a book from the 1700s. So this is pre-industrial revolution as far as books are concerned. So the paper that we're looking at is actually, since it was printed in London, it is actually linen rag paper. So the old paper used to be made out of fabric. So this is completely before any use of wood pulp as paper in history, which is why it looks in such fantastic condition, because it is actually fabric. And looking through it, it's brilliant. It looks so good.
And so that, so Christy, that lasts longer, the fabric?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's actually fabric, it is chemically inert as far as active decay goes, without some kind of outside influence like mold. So it's going to last a lot longer. So when you see a book that seems really old but has really fantastic paper, you can almost guarantee that it was printed and produced before 1840. So in the Industrial Revolution, 1840 is around when they start mass producing paper from wood pulp, and that's where you see the quality of the paper go downhill really fast. So this is a really beautiful volume, but I wanted to show you what an older volume looks like that hasn't had any conservation work done on it yet. Beautiful. So we switched the order around on you a little bit, Jared. I'm sorry to tell you that.
No problem.
So this is another book that you have in your collection. And this one is something that a lot of people bring old books in for. Over time, the book will decay and this part, the hinge, will break. The cool thing about this book, and one reason why I wanted to show it to everybody, is this has actually been fixed in the past. So this is the original leather to the book, but you see this line where it's cut and there's different leather along the edge. So at some point, this repair, giving it a new leather spine and fixing this broken hinge, is called a rebacking. So at some point, this book had been rebacked before by somebody else. So that'll go ahead.
You said rebacking?
Rebacking.
Rebacking, no, okay.
And you can see on the spine, the color of the leather is completely different from the cover. So whoever did this rebacking took the time to do all of the delicate tooling and labeling and everything. They did a really good job, and I'm sure that it lasted quite a good while, but it didn't last long enough. So I really liked this example because it does show an example of old mending. But this is an 1801 book, so you can see that it's still got very good quality paper. It's got some fold-out maps, which are fantastic. But overall, it looks like it's in really good shape, which is awesome. I love to see books like this come into the lab because they are always a joy to work on.
Amazing.
Now, this next one is a little tiny one from your collection. This is Night Thoughts from 1806. And I really liked this one because it has a peculiar repair that I've never seen come into my lab before. At some point, the hinge had broken, and this was somebody's repair for it. So they took a couple of little tabs of leather and they wrapped it around the spine, reattaching the covers. So when you open it, this cover, I don't know how well you can see, but it's still broken and separate. But these new little hinges have reconnected it and put it back in place. So this is one thing that concerns us when we look at old books, is seeing old text and writing. A lot of old inks were made of a lot of different things. We don't need to get into the chemistry of all of the different kinds of inks, but it can vary widely. So when we look at treating an old book, we pay attention to stuff that is handwritten in ink and pencil rather than what was printed on the inside. Usually this is water fast. So a lot of the treatments we use involve using water or moisture of some kind, including glues. But a lot of old ink is not water fast. So if for whatever reason we had to do a small mend on the edge of this and it covered some of the handwriting, there's a good chance that that ink will run. And so that's one thing that we look at when we take a look at old books, and one thing that we're very concerned about.
And
but as you can see, this
little book.
This is also rag,
okay.
And it was printed in London, 1806. So it is also likely linen rag.
Linen rag.
When you see old rag paper that comes from the Americas, then you start seeing stuff that's printed with cotton rag. But cotton in London was pretty precious at this period, even though it was in major production here in the States. So you wouldn't see cotton generally going to the rag recyclers to be used for paper. So there might be a little bit of cotton in this paper, but it's most likely majority linen.
Amazing.
Now this next piece is a treasure of your collection, and I could not wait to get a hold of it to talk about it. So I'll unwrap it, but Jared, would you please tell everybody what treasure this is that you've got?
I will. This is Mariah Hester Monroe's, who's James Monroe's daughter. This is her music book. Mariah Hester, she was sort of the real musician in the Monroe family. And she collected sheet music, for popular tunes of the day. It's sort of like the old equivalent of your daughter collecting, iTunes phone, tunes or something like that. And there's many of the marches, that were written for her father and things like that. And she had them bound into this book. Interestingly, the book itself, it has sort of a little secret hidden gem on the inside. On the inside, one of the inside covers, there is a recipe for bitters. And I'm not making this up, it's actually in there. And it's really, really hard to see. But if you use like negative photography, it just contrast, you can actually pull out the recipe. And let me tell you, I'll read off, I actually have the recipe here. I'll read it off real quick and then we'll get back to Kristi here. So the recipe that's written on the inside of that book is 2 ounces of gentian root, 1 dose of bitter orange peel, 1/2 dose of Virginia snake root. You heard that right, Virginia snake root. 1/2 dose of calamus, a few chamomile flowers, 1 quart of brandy. Let the above ingredients stand for 2 or 3 days in a bottle and swallow 10 minutes before dinner, 1/3 of a wine glass mixed with 2/3 of water. And that's supposed to help steady your stomach and that sort of thing. So there you have it. The Mariah Hester Monroe bitter recipe that's written on the inside of her music book. So.
Yeah, so I was really excited looking at this book, not only because it's such an important piece of your collection, but also because this has been fully conserved. So a little bit of restoration has happened. They've fixed the spine. So looking at it, you can see that it's got nice new leather along the spine. This is the old leather here. You can tell because the color difference. Color matching old leather is really, really, really hard. And I'm definitely not good enough to make a leather mend that completely disappears. So there's no problem at all with the binder who did this. They did a beautiful job in the not restoration, but the conservation of this book. But one of the things I noticed when I was looking at this that I pointed out to some people who work here is that this book is actually pretty cheap. Its value now is obviously worth far more than what it was bought for, but when it was purchased, it was a pretty cheap book.
Right.
One indicator is that the cover is actually old junk paper, and you can kind of see it had been printed. So it was some kind of form that had to be filled in, but then because it was leftover paper from something, they took it and they marbled it. So originally the cover of this was very deeply marbled, had a lot of color to it, and it must have been really beautiful. But over time, a lot of that's worn away, so you can see the underlying printing on the paper. They might have done that in finer old books, but generally you don't see that. You don't see them recycling old paper into covers for new books. And opening,
It's fascinating, it really is.
Yeah, opening it up, you can see that the conservator who dealt with this previously, and I don't know their name, but they did a fabulous job. You can see this fabric right here in the crease, and that was to reinforce it. So when they reattached the cover, they used the fabric to reinforce that hinge to make it last longer. And I think that was a problem with the previous one that I showed you, where it had been repaired, but it had broken again, was it didn't have an inside reinforcement, which is really important when you're fixing old books. So you can see it here. Another thing that I found is they did mending on individual pages. So you can see that it had been torn along here, but you see this corner here where the color of the paper changes slightly. This is actually Japanese tissue, is the industry term. Could be from Japan, it could be from Korea, but generally it's called Japanese tissue. And so this is chemically inert paper that is produced from wood pulp or some other kind of plant pulp that doesn't decay over time, the same way that tree wood pulp does. So they did a lot of repairs to some of the damaged paper in here. And that's what's restored it to the point today that I can actually turn the pages without worrying that I'm going to make further tears.
Christy, you know, I'm sure you've seen a lot of books with things written on the inside from, you know, back in the day. Would you have any thoughts on why, you know, Mariah or, you know, maybe anyone in general would write something like a recipe on the inside of a music book? Like, you know, I'm sure you've seen a lot of that sort of thing.
Yeah, actually, I end up with a lot of papers that have math on them. And if you look at some of your old books, there might be some math jotted inside the cover. I see a lot of that because any empty piece of paper was useful and precious. So I can see her writing that on the inside of the cover of this because this is something she would have wanted to hold on to and keep. So it was a good place to put it so that she'd never lose it. But you see a lot of things like that. Not only people writing their names on the inside, but you'll see old mathematical sums. You'll see people practicing their handwriting and practicing writing their names. You come across all kinds of writing, and it's just generally because they needed somewhere to, you know, do out their math or, you know, practice their signature. And well, that's the space they had.
Right. Amazing.
So one cool thing I noticed in the printing of this, that this is, I think it's letterpress. I'm not a complete professional on the different printing methods and when they're used during history. I just know how to treat them. But if you look at this, you'll see that this is, you'll see faintly the rectangle going around this, which means that it was one big rectangular plate that was pressed down that made these imprints on all the pages. And each page has it to a different degree. You can see this one is a little bit stronger. And if you were here, you'd actually be able to feel the indent in the paper where that press was made. So these are some really beautiful pieces. Another thing that indicated to me that this was kind of a cheap book is that the paper changes quality throughout. So you have this, which is really beautiful. It's white paper. It's stayed white over time. So the chemical makeup of the bath that they used to make this piece of paper, it was really clean. But going through here, you find pieces of paper like this. And obviously they're in the same book. They've aged the same way at the same time. But this had a lot more stuff in its slurry when it was pulled as paper. That has caused it to age very differently from the surrounding paper. And that's not something you generally see in a fine print book. You don't see paper coming from multiple different batches. And that's what this would have been. You see paper that's all come from the same batch or from the same producer. So you generally end up with all white pages, not pages that vary from gray to brown to white. And one other thing that I noticed going through this is something that is really hard to describe because it's very fine detail. Let me see if I can find a good example. Let me see if we can zoom into that. Oh, it's hard to see, but you'll just have to take my word for it. Some of the pages came, well, all of these pages came from large sheets, right? So they were very large sheets of paper that everything was printed on and then it was cut down. Well, some of these pages are actually the large sheets of paper rotated 90 degrees. So some of these original sheets of paper came in and were printed like this, and some were printed like this. And that gives you a really weird effect in the book. And it also, when you're looking at it up close, there are very fine lines in the production of the paper. And you can see where the lines change orientation. And that's another good indication that these, that this was a cheaper, it was a cheaper book. Not all of the paper came from the same production line, and they didn't take enough care to make sure that all of the lines in the paper were oriented the same direction, which is really interesting. So I'm led to believe that there was something about about Monroe's financial situation at the time when he would have bought this book that might have influenced the quality of the book he purchased?
Well, that certainly tracks. You know, around the time of this purchase, you know, in this early part of his first presidency, you know, he literally was, you know, this was not that long after the War of 1812. You know, that was a very recent memory, and they were refurbishing the White House, you know, the recently restored presidential house, our president's house. And you know, so Monroe, you know, he was using a lot of his own furniture, you know, a lot of his own you know, china and things like that. And you know, so it's not like he at that point in time he didn't have an extensive ability to buy super expensive things or personal things for, you know, certainly for his daughter. So that definitely tracks.
Yeah, but overall, this is a really, really beautiful piece, and I think it's really valuable in your collection. And whoever you sent it out to have the conservation work done on it did a beautiful job. It was worth absolutely every red cent, because this is going to be, looking at it, it is physically stable, and it looks like it's going to be chemically stable for at least another 100 or so years before you have to look at treating it again. And another really cool thing about this is the kinds of enclosures that they made for this book to keep it safe. So we've got the book, and we've got this wrapped enclosure, and it's just a couple of sheets that open like so, and then we put the book inside. And once it has been wrapped up in this, then there's a box that it goes into inside that. And what this does is it actually protects the edges of the book from bouncing around, hitting things, and coming into contact with things. So it's going to be really useful in preventing any edges of paper from getting caught on things and torn. And it's going to help keep the book stable and secure whenever it's moved from place to place or from shelf to shelf. So they did a really beautiful job. I love this enclosure.
If you could have your druthers, would you put all of the books in enclosures like that?
All of the books that are worth it.
Okay.
We're about to move on to some of the books from my own collection. I have a collection of really old, really ugly looking books that I can practice new chemicals and new techniques on. And so those books I wouldn't put in an enclosure like that because they're kind of trash. So starting off, I've got this book, which is a mess. So to be clear, this book is from my collection, not from the James Monroe collection at all. But this book dates to, let me clarify, I can't remember if this one had a date in it or not, 1883. So this is Industrial Revolution paper. This is wood pulp paper. And some things that we start to see in wood pulp paper is discoloration at the edges and discoloration on the insides. So with the Industrial Revolution, a lot more people are learning how to read. And with the increase in readers, there's an increased demand for books. Well, you have an increased demand for books for people who are middle class. They can't afford really expensive books like some of the previous ones we looked at. So they find cheaper ways to make books. And some of the cheaper ways involve mixtures of new and interesting chemicals. And unfortunately, those new and interesting chemicals can have a really, really bad effect on the surrounding materials as time goes on. So the problem with this one is whatever this leather was treated with was exceptionally acidic, because if you see here, where this is darker, this is all acid damage. And it's only showing up where the leather has had direct contact with the facing page. So we've got really acidic leather here. Another conservation challenge with it. Let me find a blank piece of paper to show you, because it doesn't show up very well on bare skin unless you're right up against it. But this leather is affected by what they call red rot. So I've got a clean piece of paper, and you can see it's powdery. It comes off on your hands, it comes off on your skin, on your clothing. So this is a common thing for old leather. It's something that a lot of old leather experiences. So if your book is experiencing that, it doesn't mean that your book was low quality or badly produced. It's just one of those things that happens. So as you can see, my cover is completely off. I have no spine at all. Oh, and I just lost the back cover. So I can be easy about this because this is not an incredibly valuable book. And also I know exactly how to fix it. And I don't have to pay myself to fix it. So, but looking at some of these, it's got some really beautiful woodcuts in there. It's called American Progress, or the Great Events of the Greatest Century, Life Delineations of Our Most Noted Men, 1883. So I chose this book to show you because this book has what a lot of old books encounter, which is things have been stored inside it. And I see this in practically every single old book that comes through the doors, especially old family Bibles. And it's a good place to store and hold on to things for, you know, for later, to keep it nice and keep everything in one place, but it has a negative effect on the surrounding material. You see these darker ovals here. It's actually from the leaves that have been preserved in here. So this is acid damage from the material. And you're going to see a lot of that when you look at old material in things like this. So I just found this. I didn't find this before we started talking, but this is a little hand card of poetry and songs that was handed out by a disabled man. So it looks like it was sold on the street, and it was a way for him to make a living selling these small pamphlets on the street. So you can see it was 5 whole cents. And the front tells the story of how he got his hands mangled and became disabled, which is interesting. I'm going to do more research about that later because I only just found it. This is a really good example of acid damage over time. So this is a very small piece of birch bark. So it's really lovely. It's been preserved very well, but you can see the effect it's had on the surrounding paper. And these aren't other pieces of birch bark. This is acid damage from the actual item. And a lot of plant materials leave stains like this on the surrounding pages, which is problematic. There's only so much I can do to kind of mitigate that damage. Most of it is stuff that I advise against doing, like taking and bleaching the paper, things like that. Anything that's going to negatively affect the structure of the paper and the soundness. Usually I just recommend removing them from between the pages, or if you'd rather not remove them, then go out and buy an acid-free or archival folder and put it inside that and put it back in the book. And then that way it's being acidic against the acid-free paper and not the actual material that you've got your book made out of. So let me see. These were really neat though, because they're samples that someone's obviously taken the time to label and identify. So this is a walnut leaf. And this one is cherry. So I am not a tree person. I cannot confirm or deny whether or not these are from walnuts or cherry. I'd have to ask someone else who can identify on site. But it's worth looking through your old books, especially if they've been handed down from other family members. Oh, there's a large piece of birch bark. You see the stain it's had on the surrounding area. Now, if we left that there for a long amount of time, eventually it would eat through the paper completely in this shape, which is not something we want to see happen to a book that's important to us, right? But then again, if this belonged to a family member who was into planting trees or growing trees, trimming trees, then it might be important to keep and to keep in that place. Oh, I haven't seen this before. Look at that. It's an old playing card. But again, you see the material it was made out of was acidic and it's causing damage to the surrounding area. So when people bring in a lot of old family Bibles, they have a lot of stuff like this in there, like this. So things from funerals, things from memorials, programs from baptisms and programs from memorials, things like that. So when I get them and I begin work on them, the first thing I do is I go through the book page by page, even if it's like 500 pages, because I run into so many things stored between the pages that end up being really important to people. I found locks of hair. I found very tiny family photos. A lot of remembrances of small children, especially small children that had passed away. But I also find a lot of weird things. I have found chicken feathers between pages of books. I have found whiskers and food. I have found bugs. So if anyone's ever been reading a book and a bug has landed on your page and you snap it closed to kill the bug, well, that bug's probably going to be there for a very long time and eventually I'll find it. So I generally save those because I find them very interesting. And I think someday I'll see if I can get a hold of an organization that focuses on older bugs and see if I have anything of value. But yeah, this is a really good example of an old book and the kind of damage that you will see an older book of yours have. And this is something that I can fix, but it does take some work.
Now, Christy, the folks at home, that have older books and everything, they'd be really curious to hear your opinions on how would they handle and care for their books that they would have in their possession? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. So the book I was just looking at, there are a couple of challenges with having this and handling it. You saw me handling it a little carelessly, and that was on purpose, I promise. I don't do that with everyone's books. Because this is falling apart and it's one of my examples, I am not especially careful with how I handle it. Sometimes I have interns or people I teach on how to handle and deal with books like this, in which case I give them a book like this and I make them fix it. But if you've got something like this in your collection and you don't have the time or money to get it fixed, but you want to save it as best as you can, with a spine like this, with most of the spine structure missing or damaged, you want to support the spine. So you wrap your hand around the spine, and when you open it, you keep your hand there to support it. And that way you've got your hand on one side and your thumb on the other, and you can support the front page and the back. Very, very good. Sometimes if you're opening it and you're hearing the spine crackle a lot, that means things are breaking. Old glue has a shelf life just like anything else. So a lot of problems like what happened here is that the old glue has gotten to the point to where it is hardened and it's not flexible anymore. So as you use it, it's going to crackle and break. So if you're opening a book and the spine is crackling, you do want to support it. And if you open it just a little bit and it's crackling, you don't want to open it super wide, not if you care about the book. So you want to get a couple of pillows or use your hands to support it and only open it as far as it feels safe. If you let it open all the way, what's going to happen is this to the spine. And that's not healthy. That's not good for a spine. It's not good for old glue, and it's not good for old string that's sewing the book together. So as soon as your spine does that, bad things are going to start happening to it. So you want to try and support the spine as much as you possibly can. A bit like holding a newborn infant and supporting their neck. You want to make sure that you give it as much support as possible and keep it from flexing too far. So as far as like putting this on a shelf, a lot of people store their books on a shelf like that, with it sitting on a shelf. The problem with this is the books and the covers are not connected anymore. So when you have a book that is still put together, I'll use this one as an example. you can see that there's a bit of a difference from the text block height and the edge of the book height. Now, if the spine is starting to go and you store it like that, the gravity is going to pull this book down, and it's going to try and connect this book to the bottom of the shelf along with the covers. And that's what started to happen with this one. So you can see that there's a lot of space up here and very little space down here. So the book has started to pull away, the spine has started to pull away, and that's just from storing it on a shelf for far too long. Gravity wins in the end. So when you end up with an old book like that, you want to store it laying flat. It might mess up how your shelves look sometimes, but ultimately it's going to save you a lot of the trouble of the covers coming completely detached, which is what eventually happens, and the spine failing. So you want to store something like this flat. If it is important and precious to you, you might want to find something that you can buy book boxes, online, and you can find one that's about this size. And you generally want to look for book boxes from an archival or conservation company, but they sell them. Find one that's about your size and store it in that, and store it flat like this. You can find a piece of Tupperware or something and put it in that, but the problem with that or a regular cardboard box is the materials that it's made out of. So if you store this in a cardboard box, the cardboard is very acidic because they don't spend a lot of money making cardboard boxes. So they're going to use cheap material, and cheap material means it's going to decay quickly. And like I showed you with some of the images and items inside this, anything that's touching this or around it is going to affect it. So if you store this in a Tupperware, well, maybe 10, 15 years down the road, the Tupperware starts to lose some of its plasticizers and becomes acidic. And sometimes old plastic gets sticky and soft, and that could come off on the book. That could definitely start degradation and speed up the ultimate death of the material, if I'm not being too dramatic. Now all of this is biological material. You know, this is natural material. It is all going to decay and fall apart at some point in history. There's only so much we can do to protect it. And so we do what we can while we can. A lot of the treatments I do usually save the book for another 100 years, 50 years, sometimes more. But at that point, it will usually need to see a conservator again to have everything updated and fixed. And just handling that book, look what it's done to my fingers. So there's your red rot right there. It's gotten really gross, and it'll rub off on everything. Now with a book like this, this is industrial age. So a lot of the old books you see in in vintage shops and things like that are going to be older like so, but they're not going to be as old as the 1700s volume we looked at earlier. So one of your tip-offs is that this has a cloth cover, and that's definitely Industrial Revolution change that happened. This is a Hardy Norseman. This is also from my collection, so don't worry about it. It's okay. I will continue to love it and take care of it further down the road, but today is not its day. So you can see, because it's been sitting on a shelf for so long and gravity has pulled on the text block and pulled it loose, it's starting to come loose. And this is some of the things that tear over time that will make it come out of its housing. Another thing is, this is old acidic paper, and this is some of the damage that you'll see happen with old acidic paper is the edges will get really brittle and just fall off. So you end up with a lot of paper crumbs, as I think of them, because it comes off like nothing. And that's over time, the acid has eaten away at the physical structure of the book, making it, or physical structure of the paper rather, making it really delicate and easy to break and come apart. You don't see new paper do this, and this is the result of acid damage over time. Now, there are some things that we can do to fix this and to mitigate it. If this was a really important piece of paper, say with somebody's signature on it that meant a lot, one thing we can do is we can treat the paper chemically, and that will provide a buffer in there to slow down and stop the acid damage. But what I'm doing is I'm introducing a chemical into the structure of the paper so that it's there immediately to stop the acid damage as it happens. Now, eventually that chemical is going to be all used up and it will need to be refreshed. So that's something that happens. Another thing we can do is I can use Japanese tissue and paste it down over the entire surface of the paper. And it comes thin enough that once you get it all glued down, aside from the parts that are missing, you can't even tell that it's there. But it's a structure that's sitting on top of this that will help hold it together so it's not losing pieces like this anymore. But when you look at an old book like this, there's only so much that we can do to fix it because this entire book is acidic paper. You can see the discoloration in the spine and on the edges of the paper. Those are good indications that it is acidic. If it predates 1840 and it has discolored edges of the paper, that's usually from environment. So environmental smog, they could have been in a coal burning house at some point. The owners could have been really heavy smokers, and that'll cause discoloration around the edges as well. You'll see less of it on the bottom side though, because if this is being stored on a shelf, this is against the shelf. And so the shelf is going to take it. A lot of people bring older books like this to me to get fixed. And I tell them, oh, absolutely, I can fix it. But then at that point, you have to try and balance out, what is this book worth to me? What is it worth on the open market? And is the conservation or restoration of the book going to be more expensive than either of those things? So it's a balancing act that you have to do when you look at doing book conservation. Now, like I said, I run into a lot of old family Bibles, in which case, yes, it is worth conserving your old family Bible, especially if it's got family history recorded in it on the pages. That's really important. And it's not only important to your family, but at some point it could be really important to a genealogist down the road. So that's something that you might want to save. But a book like this, I haven't looked it up online to see what it might sell for, and I haven't taken it to an antique bookseller. But I would guess that this book probably isn't really worth much on the market. So if I can look and find your book on the market and it's, you know, an old version that's in better shape than this sells for $30, and this isn't a valuable to you, given to you by your grandfather beloved book, I'd say just go and buy a new one. Because the amount of money it would take to restore this and the amount of time I can absolutely dedicate to it, but we have to decide whether or not it's really worth it to you.
That's absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. We do have some questions here, but before we do, can you tell us a little bit more about your business and your archives there?
Sure. Yeah, I'm located here in Fredericksburg. I'm over in the Battlefield Industrial area by Norfleet and Summit Recycling. So I'm located inside the Fredericksburg workshop. I rent some space from them. And I formed my company to help do the preservation and conservation of normal people's materials. Obviously, the Smithsonian has plenty of money and plenty of conservators to dedicate to saving their things. But when you look at the Virginia area, you have families that have descended, you know, all the way back to the Civil War, to the Revolutionary War, and they have family artifacts too. But generally getting a hold of a conservator to do this kind of work can be very expensive and can be rather difficult. So I started the company to help regular, ordinary people and small organizations, churches, nonprofit organizations, and things like that to help get conservation for their items. Because it's generally something that's a little bit out of reach for the average person. And I don't think that family history should just be let to decay like that. Especially in this area, there's so much important family history that you might have in your attic or in your basement or on your shelf. And it's something that might be important enough that we don't want to let it decay.
Very good. That sounds good. We do have a couple questions here. For one, would laminating the pages that fall out of the book help preserve those pages if you can't fix them?
So funny enough, when lamination came out, they actually thought that that was the gold standard for conservation. And so they ended up laminating a lot of things, including a lot of George Washington's things and other old family founding fathers. The problem with lamination, though, is that it was not developed with conservation in mind. So the main premise of conservation is that everything you do has to be completely reversible without having done damage to the original item. So if I drilled a hole into a book, that wouldn't be reversible. If I used Gorilla Glue on a book, that's not easily reversible. So the kind of glue and things that a conservator uses to do repairs on things are completely and easily reversible. So a lot of the glue I use is water soluble. If you get it wet, it will come undone. If it's come undone and you want it to stick again, get it wet and let it dry. So when it came to lamination, the problem is you are putting an adhesive in direct contact with the paper, and it's getting soaked in that adhesive. And over time, that adhesive is going to start to denature, it's going to start to become acidic and degrade, and it's directly going to affect what it's touching and what it's soaked into. So there has been a large movement in the conservation world after we started to see that happen, where we had to quickly get all of our old important documents out of the lamination that it's been in, because it was at threat to be completely dissolved and destroyed. So if it's something that's important to you, but might not be important to, say, your kids or grandkids, go ahead and laminate it. That's no problem. If it's something you want to preserve for your kids or grandkids, I wouldn't do it.
Very good. What book box sites, we talk about purchasing book boxes, would you recommend?
Sure. You can check out, there's a company called Gaylord Archival. There's also, and it's located here in Fredericksburg, is Hollinger Metal Edge. That's Hollinger Metal Edge. And they sell books, or they sell boxes for books, and they can also custom make boxes. And funny enough, they are located locally. So if you want to buy from them, you can purchase it online, give them a call and say, I'll just come by and pick it up, and you'll save yourself all the shipping. So that's a really good one to use too. And they have really beautiful, beautiful material for what you're paying for it. There's also, you can check Talas online. It's TALAS online.com. They're located in New York City, and they also sell custom size boxes for books, and other boxes as well. But Hollinger Metal Edge has some really good ones, and they're local. So that's definitely the first place I'd stop to look.
Very good. And here's a neat question. What was the oldest and or most important book you've restored?
I currently have in my collection an old book that was printed in the 1600s in London. It's very similar to the first book we looked at, but every page that was blank has family history written on it. Every scrap of empty paper is covered in family history. Now, I tried to find this book online to see if I could just buy it off the market, and I can't find any books, any of those books from that printing or that book in particular that was produced in England available on the market today. So not only is it a super valuable family history item, but it's also a super valuable book. I imagine if it went onto the market, it would sell for quite a lot. The problem with these questions coming to me is that I don't put prices on books. I can look online to see what other ones are selling for, but generally when people want to know what their books are worth, I send them to a local antique bookseller, and they can give them a more accurate idea of how much the physical volume is worth. Now, aside from that book, I've actually worked on at least 5 different presidential signatures, including several that, in retrospect, history might not like all that much, but it's good fun, and it's good experience to work on things like that. Most of those were personal items relating to a person's military service. So on the market, they probably wouldn't be worth that much, but to the person who owns it, they're worth quite a lot.
Are you good for a few more questions?
All right, just a couple more questions here. If it's bad to keep the stuff in the middle of the books, how would you recommend to keep the stuff with the book itself if you want to keep them together?
Yeah, at Hollinger, they also sell, it's a special piece of plastic, and it's completely chemically inert, so it won't degrade over time, but they make little envelopes out of it. So there are Mylar envelopes that you can buy that you can just slip between the pages. So putting it in an envelope of some type, even if it's just a acid-free piece of paper that's folded over around it, you can use that to kind of protect the surrounding material from its decay. And replace it every 20 or so years when the makeshift folder starts to get brown and gross.
Right. So it looks like we have two more questions here. The Japanese paper you mentioned, is there a certain type to look for? And are there colors of thickness you would recommend? And also, what type of glue would you suggest? Is this something I could do at home?
This is something you can do at home. It does take a good bit of practice and really steady hands, careful attention to detail. But generally, the glue that I use is made from wheat starch, and you can buy that online. It's wheat starch paste. Some of it comes pre-cooked, so you don't have to cook it for it to become sticky. Some of it isn't pre-cooked, which means you have to cook it. But generally, the people who sell it provide information on how to cook it or how to prepare it properly so that it becomes a good paste. The kind of paper, there are thousands of different kinds of Japanese tissue out there. Just about every kind of finish, every kind of color. You can start looking at things that are labeled Tengucho. That's Tengucho. Tengucho is one really common paper that's made, I believe, from mulberry. And that's chemically inert, and it's good for repairs. And they usually make it in lots of different thicknesses and finishes to fix your stuff with. Generally, when you're fixing a piece of paper, you want mending tissue that is going to be lighter in weight than what you're fixing. You don't want to glue your nice light paper to something that's heavy like cardboard. So you want something that's lighter in weight than that. You try and match it to the color as best you can, but sometimes you can use watercolors to tint the material before you adhere it. But it can be challenging. I don't have any problem telling people about the materials or the stuff I use. It's out there and it's freely available. You don't have to go through a reseller to get a hold of it.
Right. And then I think finally, if I'm not mistaken, the question is, do you have a particular favorite that you've restored? No, not necessarily like an older one, but just, something like a favorite that you just thought was really cool.
There is an old letter that I restored for a local woman, and I don't recall her name, so don't ask because I don't remember. But she had a series of letters that were written by an ancestor during the Civil War. And he had beautiful handwriting. He had written letters home to his mother and sisters, and it talked about his travel throughout the American South as part of the war. He was a Southern soldier, so we have one point of view during that war. But what's really interesting is at some points in his military career during the Civil War, he lost his right hand. And so the next letter they get from him is written with his left hand. And if any of us pick up a pen today and we're not already ambidextrous or left-handed, and you write with the opposite hand, it is going to look awful. And his letter looked truly awful. So to see something go from this beautiful practiced script to suddenly being written with his left hand in a field hospital during the Civil War, it gave me chills to hold that in my hands, because that is one of the most vivid, and it was incredible just to hold it in my hands and to look at the difference and look at the way this man's life had changed in a single moment, losing one arm. Now we know that that happens to soldiers and we know that happens to people, but to have that in front of you it was incredible. It was a really beautiful piece.
Astounding. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Well, that will wrap up our questions and our presentation. I got to tell you, this has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much, Christy Moore. You can find her business, their contacts are in our comments section. If you enjoyed this, could you please give us a like, and a share is even better. If you could share it on your page, that helps the algorithms and all that, and spread the word. And as always, if you have any more questions, feel free to contact us at the James Monroe Museum. Thank you so much, Lindsay Crawford, for putting this all together and being the anchor to all this. And Christy Moore, we really appreciate it. And this has been absolutely fascinating. So thank you so much. And the folks at home, enjoy the rest of your evening and rewatch this as many times as you want. So it's full of really cool stuff. Thank you so much.